Critics would argue our last topic could be a gateway to our next, opioid addiction. In dozens of cities and towns across Massachusetts, the epidemic has reached crisis proportions. And in some, they're not waiting around for a solution from the state. Like Gloucester started a few months back, the city of Brockton is now encouraging drug addicts to turn themselves in and get help without fear of being criminally charged. City officials say they respond to an average of 3 opioid overdose calls a day. Last week alone, there were reports of more than 45 which were treated with Narcan. But all involved say that is simply a Band-Aid. At the state level, there are now 3 proposals aimed at addressing these issues from the House, the Senate, and the governor. Among the big differences, Baker's bill includes a 72-hour limit on first opioid prescriptions, whereas the newly passed House bill has a 7-day limit, and the Senate bill passed in December has an option for doctors to limit pill quantities, just an option. The governor's bill would also let doctors involuntarily hospitalize drug addicts for up to 72 hours. House bill would require a mental health evaluation within 24 hours of someone going to an ER for an overdose, although future treatment would be a recommendation, not a requirement. The Senate bill has no similar measure in it. None would offer the amnesty that cities like Gloucester and Brockton now do. So will any of these changes help? Are we still missing the mark? Joining me to talk about that are Jonathan Scott. Jonathan is president and CEO of Victory Programs, which offers treatment and housing for people with substance abuse issues. Good to see you again. Patrick Cronin, who has battled opioid addiction himself, is now the program coordinator at the Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery. Great to see you too. So the issue is joint. Who got it closest to right, Jonathan, of those 3? Did any of them?
Well, I think that it's a very important legislation. I think that for me, it's not a question of the number of days around involuntary placement, whether it's 1, 3, or 30. The question is, for me, really what happens when somebody is in care? Do the people who are caring about them understand about addiction? And what happens afterward? Is there a place to send them?
But the involuntary commitment, if normal legislative procedure holds, will be 0 at the end. It's not in the House, not in the Senate, and it's likely that Baker's recommendation was that a mistake to eliminate that involuntary commitment?
Well, you know, the governor has continued to say this is just one tool in the toolbox, or it's one small piece to the multifaceted and very complex puzzle. So I think that it isn't a question of right or wrong. It's really a question of what do we really need to get ahead of the epidemic, and what we really need is both more treatment and intervention.
How close did they come to getting it right, those 3 branches there?
Well, I think, just like Jonathan was saying, the fact that Governor Baker is discussing this, we're having discussions that have never been discussed before. I mean, the 72-hour section being brought down to 0, I think.
By the way, proposed by a former addict. Chris Herron was here,
Correct.
A recovering addict, former pro basketball player. He's the one that whispered in Baker's ear about this. Mm-hmm. Baker bought it, but obviously
and I had been sectioned before too, so I know.
You have, yeah.
Yeah, Section 35 saved my life. Mm-hmm. So I think the fact that it's being discussed is good. You know, bringing it down from 72 to 0 with an evaluation, at least there's still something on the table.
You know, the term that Baker's used that I find really compelling is we have to disrupt the status quo. He's on this issue. He says that all the time. Mm-hmm. Is this disruption or is this incremental change, John?
Well, I think that he is proposing really landmark legislation. So I think it feels like incremental change because, again, it is one tool in the toolbox or one piece of the puzzle, but he's got everybody talking. And he is bringing to the forefront an issue that has been embedded in stigma and shame and silence for many, many years. So this governor is really bringing this to the forefront. So that's why, to me, it doesn't matter whether involuntary placement or commitments is 1 day or 30
the sense I get from the 2 of you, I may be reading something in that I shouldn't, but you'll correct me, is you've mentioned the governor a number of times. Mm-hmm. It seems you guys think he's the one that really gets it here, and the legislature is sort of trailing the field. Is that a fair description or no?
When you just said that statement he said before, I was at the Kennedy Institute when he really talked about disrupting, and I think that's why I've respected him so much in this situation, is that he has been not going on standard operating procedures, and I think the reason why he's not is because people are dying every single day from
but
this.
you know, Patrick, one of the things that I hear every time we have one of these discussions, I get emails, and I'm sure you live with this every day, the most painful emails, usually from a mother or father, who say, I totally agree with this. This is a great idea. And you know what the problem is? There's no bed.
Right.
for that kid. There's no bed for that young mother. So even though the ideas are good, is there enough money to provide the services that people need, even if the best of this plan is implemented, Jonathan?
So last year, Massachusetts admitted 42,000 people into detox, and only 13% of them, or about 6,100, ended up in residential care. It takes about 21 days to get into residential care, so we know that we lose a lot of people between the upfront detox intervention and the long-term care.
So there aren't enough beds.
So there are absolutely not enough beds, and we need more treatment. And I think, you know, going back to your question before, I think we have an excellent legislature that has really focused on long-term care and treatment and is doing whatever they can to shore up that very important bedrock to our system.
Again, I'm a lay person here, Patrick, but when I heard what the Gloucester police chief is, I made national news months ago. Yeah. Basically, for those who don't know at home, I know you guys know, you come in, you surrender all your equipment. We won't criminally charge you. Essentially, if you agree to have treatment, you'll be assigned an angel. They call it an angel program, someone to guide you through the process. It seems to me the whole, considering as a public health crisis, not as a criminal matter, that's not front and center in Beacon Hill's approach to this thing. Isn't that critical to address these things? It's not a crime. It's an addiction, a sickness that needs attention.
Absolutely, and I commend Gloucester. I was down in Washington, D.C. with him, and telling him, like, what he did was a huge risk, but what he's doing is working. He's not like, he's showing the statistics, he's showing the facts of the amount of people he's sending to treatment, and it's working. He is getting people into treatment when they come. And I don't know if people are worried about that on Beacon Hill, or I can't tell you if the funding is there because I don't know where that's at, but I can tell you that if we don't have treatment on demand, people are going to continue to die.
Okay, so legislature is going to have a conference committee soon. What's the one thing that you think is most important they add to the mix here that we haven't paid enough attention to? Each of you.
Well, absolutely, both stigma and addressing stigma on the community level, but also long-term care. And I think that there is a lot of emphasis on this legislation, and I think it's good legislation up front, but it's really the back end, the long-term care and getting people back home again, which is the whole point of substance abuse
Patrick,
treatment.
what would you put front and center in there?
I would think it does go hand in hand with long-term treatment, but I think what's blocking it is the insurance companies. So I think that getting Beacon Hill and state reps and legislators to enforce some type of there's requirements, but enforce some type of fines or like something has to happen to these insurance companies, because that's the reason why a lot of people are not getting into treatment, because people are not the parity of insurance is just not happening. And we don't have enough beds, but there's a lot of people that are not getting treatment because insurance companies are not fulfilling what they should.
But I'm optimistic because you two seem to think we're finally beginning to pay attention. Is that not a fair statement?
And in a way like we never have before, and I've been doing this work for 40 years, but the sad part of the paradigm is this is not a fabrication of the media. This is a real epidemic, and sadly so many young people are being affected, and so many parents are distraught trying to find the kind of help and support they need. And that's what I know the governor's hearing, and that's what everybody at the State House is hearing. It's not Boston, it's every community in the Commonwealth.
Agreed, Jonathan. It's good to see
Thank
you
you,
again.
Jim.
Good luck with this, Patrick.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
Jim.
so much for your time. I appreciate it.